Welcome to the Cynical Developer Live. This is the podcast that helps you improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology, providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we speak to Todd Gardner about modern development for modern developers. You may know Todd from NDC conferences and PubConf. He's an anti-trend developer who believes that old solutions are often better than new ones. He advocates for simple designs and balancing complexity against risk. He is a co-founder of TrackJs, where he helps thousands of developers find and fix bugs in their web applications. And now he's building a new product called Request Metrics, which will measure the performance of your web pages and API endpoints. So welcome to the Cynical Developer, Todd.
Thanks so much for having me, James.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you for coming on. I've used some of your products in the past, so
wonderful.
It's great to talk to you now, live on here. I think we had a bit of an interaction at NDC, not the one just gone, but maybe the one before that.
Yeah, I unfortunately missed the last NDC London. I was very sad.
Yeah, I couldn't get to that one either, and a lot of people from around the globe that I've known for years all messaged me and said, "Are you going to be there? We're going to be there." And I was like, "No, not this year."
So much FOMO.
Yeah, it definitely was. I was sat here watching Twitter as everybody was posting pictures. And go, I should be a part of that.
Next year.
Yeah. But we're going to talk tonight about modern development for modern developers. Now, one thing in the introduction sort of flies in the face of that title, which was you believe that old solutions are often better than the new ones.
Yeah, I think they are. And what I'm specifically talking about there is in technology choices. And what I'm referring to there is that I don't like trendy technologies, and I don't think they're often best suited from an overall perspective. One of the things that's different about me than I think many developers is that I'm financially responsible for the applications that I write, at least for the last 8 years or so through TrackJs and now Request Metrics. And what I mean by that is that when we're spending time developing it, that development time is time where I'm not, we're funding our own lives, our own costs during that development time. And so I want to make that development time as short as possible before we can start realizing some of the revenue from the software. And then when we launch it, I want to keep the operational costs of that software as low as possible because I'm the one who has to pay for them. And it's easier for us to actually make the money that we would need to live if that operational cost is low. And when I'm actually building it, I don't get to move on to another project. I am responsible for supporting the system and my customers indefinitely. And so I don't want to sign up myself up for unpredictable maintenance time and other things that are surprising and could cause outages in my system for reasons beyond my control. And so for those reasons, I really prefer older, more proven technologies, especially technologies that have a lot of known downsides, because we know what those downsides are. We know what the failure modes of those pieces of technology are. I know how something is going to break down, and so I can mitigate those problems. On the other side, if you're following a new trend and you're adopting a new piece of technology that could potentially change the world, that's awesome. There's tons of upside to doing that. But there's also tons of downside because you don't know how it's going to fail. You might be the project that exposes a critical flaw. You might be the developer that has to expose or that has to debug this new issue to figure out how to handle this security vulnerability or close this attack vector or handle this clustering edge case. You're signing yourself up to do a bunch of work that is beyond this immediate scope of your project. And when you're directly financially tied to it, that might just not make as much sense depending on what the pros and cons of the tech are.
Yeah, I think you raise a lot of good points there. And it's It's something that I find myself doing mainly with my side projects, is that I always try and build it in a different technology every time I pick up a new side project. Mainly the back end's written in .NET, whether that's .NET Framework or .NET Core. But I recently wrote the front end for a new side project in Vue.js. I'm currently working on one that's in Svelte. I've looked at starting one that was in React, and picking up the new and shiny stuff. Now, that's not something I would ever dream of doing for a paying client, because I'm being paid to get in there and provide a solution to a problem in the most cost effective and fastest way possible, and that's just utilizing what I already know, which can be in some cases older technology.
Absolutely.
Uh,
And one of those technologies that you're mentioning is going to be the new hotness. It's going to be tomorrow's old technology. It's
yeah,
going to be the one that wins and becomes the one that everybody should be using. And as a consultant, living that consultant life, that's exactly what you should be doing. Is you should be learning a broad scope of things, because it's at somewhat of your client's discretion what stack you should be using. uh, from my perspective, I am both the developer and the client, and so I need to pick the tech that both I want to write as a developer, but also that I want to still be responsible for in 5 years without, feeling that overwhelming urge to rewrite my tech stack every year, which totally would erode all of my time and energy.
yeah, definitely. It's something I actually posted to Twitter not that long ago. I quickly needed to whip up an application to do something. And I sat for a little while and went, right, what do I build it in? I thought, why am I sat here thinking about this? I could have had this done now if I'd done it in MVC. I've not built an MVC app for a little while, but I was like, done. I think it took me 15 minutes to do the application and get it fully working. And I posted on Twitter saying, sometimes it's better just to go with what you know to fix the problem than try something shiny and new just because it's cool.
Absolutely. I think when you're starting a project, you need to know what are you trying to accomplish. In the very early days of building TrackJS, we had this debate about what we should write the stack in. We talked about writing it in Go, or maybe in Python, or maybe in Node, but we ended up settling on .NET because we felt like it was the platform that we knew the most about, that we could go the fastest in. And it felt boring and it felt a little stodgy to us, but it felt reliable. And that's what we were trying to do. We felt like there was enough uncertainty in what we were embarking on doing that we didn't need to take on more uncertainty of learning a new platform.
Sure. I think you probably made a few JavaScript developers wince there, telling them that their beloved TrackJS is actually written in .NET.
Well, it's not a super big secret, but there is a lot of misconceptions of people who think that that's written in Node, and it's not written in Node.
Bombshell. So, as you said there about, we're sort of blaspheming a little bit against saying using the new technologies, but for yourself, from your point of view, what is modern development? How does it compare to what we were doing 15 years ago, or even as 5 or 10 years ago?
I think adopting an idea of the cloud is one of the bigger things that's different, and what that means is very different for everybody. There's just so many different concepts that have kind of come together in the last 10 to 15 years and really matured, right? We have multiple levels of the cloud today. We have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and you can choose what level to integrate different parts of your application with. And each of those has their own cost benefit trade-offs that are different for everybody and for every organization. But you get to choose. You don't have to. You're not responsible for writing and hosting all of your application anymore, should you choose not to. And so you can rely on a third party to handle some bit of your code or to run some part of your infrastructure if you don't want to do that. personally, I really love infrastructure as a service offerings. I think they are brilliant. You can lease hardware so incredibly cheap in 2020. It is amazing. Like, seriously, forget virtual machines. Virtual machines are crap. Even the fast ones that you pay a lot for are really slow. You can get these massive pieces of metal that all you have to do is a little bit of configuration with like infrastructure automation tools like Puppet or Ansible or whatever to get uh, a server spun up to do amazing things for like $200 a month. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, I can get like 8-core Xeon server class processors with like 128 gigs of memory for like $200. And that can run like these amazingly high workloads. And I think that is something that was completely unheard of 5 years ago. That any startup, any small business, small project, side thing can get these amazing pieces of server enterprise class hardware at really affordable levels. On the other side of the spectrum are like software as a service offerings. Things like you can plug into services to handle your credit card billing, or you can plug into services to handle your mail sending, or your error monitoring, or your performance tracking, or any kind of thing like that. Like hand or offload pointed parts of your application that you're going to need to build, but maybe there's just too much complexity for you to write it yourself. I think being able to look at the marketplace of cloud offerings and understand the risk and reward profile of each is one of these core concepts of taking advantage of modern software development.
Yeah, and I'm always known for calling .NET pretend programming, because we take little Lego blocks and we put them together and we build bigger Lego blocks, and we eventually build a house and a car, and we're always standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think a little while ago, a few years ago, it was very prevalent that that's what .NET was, but now it seems that is just development. We are all doing smaller pieces, more focused pieces of work, and leveraging other people's work to achieve those goals. Exception management and tracking of problems in live code. I've run out of fingers to count on how many times I've rolled my own, and now it's just not worth it for the time and the money and the energy it takes. You just go out and you'd buy the service to do it.
Yeah, there's just so many advantages. Like in that particular problem of like logging and alerting and tracking your exceptions. I obviously know a lot about that, having built a software as a service tool in that space. There are so many weird edge cases and failure modes to support, and making sure that data is available even when your main system is down or your main system is in a weird state, so that you can backtrack it and get that information back. There are just so many advantages to doing it. And many of those cloud offerings are just so cheap compared to like the amount of developer hours that you would spend trying to build that up yourself.
Yeah. And everything seems to be a SaaS, a PaaS, or any other word with extra A's and S's in. I know back in episode 53 with Zach Burt, we talked about software as a service. So we had a service to build you software as a service.
Oh, yeah.
So everything is as a service now.
Now, of course, with all things, there are downsides, right? Is that when you are separating a part of your system off into a third-party offering, there's risk that it's going to introduce latency, that it's a third party that could change things without you necessarily expecting them to change, and a risk that they can just go down. And so it's not completely offloading the work and it being the same level of reliability that you had before, because it's not. You're trading away a little bit of your reliability. And so you got to make sure that it's not a service that the risk that you're taking on of them changing their API on you or them going offline is worth the value that you get out of it. And so that's really a per situation kind of discover or piece of or decision that you need to make, because in a lot of cases it's worth it, but not all of them. I've personally been burned more than a few times on having a third party change their API on me, and they'll either they'll do it without any notice, or they'll send you an email saying, hey, you have 30 days to get off the deprecated API. You need to do it right now or this is going to break. I'm like, damn it, I had my 30 days planned out. I don't want to do that. Like that's not in my plan. I needed to build this other feature for this customer, or I needed to do this other piece of work that was going to advance our product. Instead, I have to like move the cheese around to just reshuffle the API because some third party thinks it's better. Those conversations are incredibly frustrating when they happen. And so you got to make sure that it's worth it. If you truly build up your system as nothing but a glued together stack of third party Legos, that system is incredibly fragile. And it's going to require lots of ongoing, unplanned maintenance to keep it going as all of these third parties change performance characteristics or API calls, or some of them disappear, or some become insolvent, or whatever. There has to be something that is yours, and enough that is yours that you're delivering stability and value to your customers.
Yeah. And from the dev point of view, make sure that you are abstracting away from these third parties as well, and not just using them direct, as I keep banging on to many people, because as Todd said there, if this service changes or that business goes out of business and you have to go and use a different company, you don't have to rewrite all of your code. So there's definitely a lot of things to think about and deal with that you probably wouldn't if you rolled your own. But they tend to, as you say, cover all those outliers and edge cases that maybe you didn't think about as well. So it's definitely a trade-off there. Yeah. Now, we've talked about sort of more of the technology side of it, but what about practices and things like that? How have they come along in that time?
Well, so 15 years ago is when like the concepts of Agile were manifesting themselves, right? I don't actually know how many years ago it was. It was a lot of years ago. And they were pretty revolutionary at the time. Like, it wasn't the kind of concepts that I think a lot of companies were doing. And then people started like building religions around them, which I think was a big mistake. There was the, here are the practices as defined by our disciples, and we will follow these practices to the letter. And if you are not doing it, then you are not pure. And you might hear some disdain in my voice for them, because I have lots of disdain in my voice for them, because I think all of these things are training wheels. They're training wheels to thinking critically about what do you need to do to solve your problem, and how do you work together efficiently as a team. If you can think critically about the whole of delivering your system, which is very hard to do. Most systems are too big for any one person to like fully grasp. By that, I mean, the system is bigger than your technical architecture. It's a system of who's working on it, when, how do you do maintenance? How do you deliver it to customers? How do customers pay you? How long are they going to pay you? How do you market it to them? How do you, like, the entire set of interactions around your system is what I mean when I say system. And that's too big for people to understand for most systems. But if you can have a group of people that really understand that, and those group of people trust each other and can work together effectively, then you don't need any of this. Then like the list of like Agile principles would have been like, yeah, duh. Like, of course that's what we do. Like all the other things were just weird side effects that we needed to communicate what our intentions were. And I think in a lot of ways, small startup teams manifest that. In that, I think of the team that I work with on TrackJs is by far the most highly effective team I have ever worked in. And we get stuff done at a ludicrous pace compared to any corporate job I have ever worked. But we don't have a daily stand-up. We don't have retrospectives. We don't measure code coverage. We don't exercise TDD unless you want to exercise TDD for the problem that you're on, but nobody cares. We don't have any like predefined meeting that we need to have. We don't have a predefined way that we do planning. We just kind of do what needs to happen. We have a loose board that we use Trello for, I guess, but like it's nothing unique about Trello. It could be a notepad document for all we care. We have a loose thing of like, here's our priorities. As long as there are priorities, we work on them. If it's the most important thing, that's what we're working on. If it's not the most important thing, we're not working on it. There's no estimates. There's none of that other stuff because we don't need any of that. All of those sort of things, in my belief, are weird training wheel artifacts for teams that don't inherently communicate well and don't trust each other.
Yeah, definitely. I've recently gone through exactly the same thing, almost down to a T, and it's music to my ears to hear somebody else reiterate almost word for word what I'd said on the same topic, completely unrecorded, off air. It makes me feel a little bit better that I'm not a maniac in thinking that. But then they do say that great minds think alike, but idiots seldom differ. So we'll take that whichever way you want.
Yeah, whichever way. Ultimately, yeah. I'm not incentivized in any way to win an argument about agile or software development processes. I'm just doing what works for me and my team and sharing my perspective on it. And if you think it's a good idea, cool. I'll love to talk about it. If you think I'm dumb, I don't care. I'm still shipping.
Yeah. I was told that we need to follow the agile practices that are being put in place, and I'm all for agile. I like the way that it works. I like the way that it improves teams that aren't mature enough yet. It gets them to that point. And but to tell me and my team that we're not good enough, that we're not doing anything when we're actually shipping more software than anybody else, we're pushing stuff out faster. Everybody knows what's going on because, as you say, it's about effective communication. And we all talk. When we were in an office together, we all talked constantly about what's going on. Everybody knew what was going on. We didn't need to have those stand-ups. We didn't need to have extensive ticketing systems with every little detail. It was all about what's priority, what we're working on, what we're going to get done, what we're going to deliver in the next day, 2 days. It was all that short-term, bang, 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 get stuff out. It works really well, but there are people that are against that.
Yeah, and usually it's the people who are against that are the people who are outside that circle of trust or outside of the know, right? Is they don't trust your team, that your team is doing the right thing for the system or doing the right thing or communicating your progress correctly. And they don't trust you that you're doing that. And so they want to wrap your team in process because they feel they can trust process.
Yeah. And we've had concerns raised at different times about the likes of pair programming and stuff like that as well. That it's often seen, well, there's two of you doing that sort of work, doing that one piece, so that's twice the cost for that feature. Do we really need both of you on it?
Oh, that's awful. We do pair programming a lot. We do triple programming with all three of us working on something together when we think it's really appropriate. We call it like mob programming, which I think is the common term for it.
Sure. So mob programming differs in to extreme or pair programming in what way?
I think it's just if there's two people, it's a pair. If there's more than two people, it's a mob. Like, I don't know if there's any more sophisticated definitional difference than, two or more than two.
Sure.
There's also, in extreme programming and that definition of pair programming, I think there were, again, training wheels of how to do it effectively that aren't truly necessary if everybody is like on the same page and trusting each other. Like, because there's lots of rituals that I've seen applied to pair programming where, like, one person writes the test and the other person writes the code, and then you trade back and forth, or similar, like, things where, like, one person has the docs and one person has the code, and they're telling them what to do, and all kinds of ways to make sure essentially that everybody is engaged and involved together. Where if you're already engaged and you know why you're doing it, you can kind of skip over all of the motions, all of the rituals, and still get the same benefit. And so we don't really have any ritual for us. We're all remote. We were remote even before the current situation. And so we would do our mob programming just over, a web meeting. One person would be driving that day, would be in control of the development that day. We wouldn't switch multiple times per day just because there's kind of some overhead in figuring out who's sharing and getting their environment set up to be effective at sharing. So one person would drive. The other two people would be participating, and we would set out for a goal. We'd be like, all right, here's the feature. Here's the thing that we are trying to accomplish today. And the person driving, usually they're a little bit less responsible for, like, looking up docs and that sort of thing, just because the context switching is a little bit harder. But they would kind of push through, and the other people would correct mistakes along the way, or suggest new ideas or refactoring opportunities, or those sort of things. But the benefit on why we do this isn't because the developer goes faster, because they don't. They definitely go slower. And it does consume, all of us for, the entirety of that session, usually longer, because mob programming is exhausting. Like, if we do 3 hours of mob programming in a day, like, there's not a whole lot else that's going to get done that day, to be honest. It's really hard to it sucks a lot of, like, energy from you to be engaged like that. Yeah. But the reason why we think it's so powerful is that it has all three of us in perfect awareness of why this part of the system is the way it is. We were all immediately there and involved in every design choice that went into that part of the system. And so we tend to use mob programming for new, highly important features in our applications. Things that we know customers are going to be interacting with, that we know people are going to have questions about, or that we know we're going to be building on and growing into something bigger. And we want to all have a really strong basis of understanding about how does this work. And mob programming is infinitely more effective than any sort of code review process at getting that, because we were all there, we were all engaged, we were all committed to what we were doing. And so we can all take that basis of understanding and build off later into whatever new features we want to work on independently.
Sure. So I think what you're saying is that mob programming isn't you all gathered around a single computer, one of the devs on the mouse, one on the keyboard, and the other one shouting where to move the cursor.
That sounds
Press
really ineffective. That sounds like a weird drunken developer party game.
Yeah, because I quite like pair programming. It works really well, but then I've looked. I've never done mob programming, but I've looked at it, and it just seems like it could be a very good excuse for some of the devs to sit around and do nothing, look at their phone, and just waste time while others actually do the work, and the rest of the team sort of like are panicking to try and find out how stuff works and things like that. Is that something that you found, or is it a case of you can only really do it with experienced, mature developers that are trusted to get on with their work?
So when I was doing like some consulting gigs, I would use mob programming as like an educational tool of like, we're talking about like, here's how we're going to do this pattern. Here's how we're going to apply this new pattern in our code base. And yeah, I definitely saw what you're talking about. There were some developers in the room that, were not engaged. They were on their phone. They were like not paying attention. And, it wasn't probably a great thing for them. It wasn't probably the best use of time for them, but not because the mob was not effective. It's because honestly, they weren't good at their job. They weren't engaged with the team. Like they weren't part of it. They didn't have anything to share. They weren't really interested in what we were doing. And that's fundamentally a team and a trust issue right there, is that like there wasn't a strong team in place, and all that the mob programming session did was really kind of expose that. I wouldn't say that the mob programming was the wrong tool there. I would say that like there might be a personnel issue involved if somebody's not really engaging or is using it as an opportunity to slack off.
Yeah.
With what we do now at TrackJs, nobody's like off on their phone. Like we're a really small team, and we're all directly incentivized into the success of the company. And so nobody's like screwing off. Like if we're together and we're working on it, we're together and we're working on it. And if somebody is like getting to a burnout point where they can't focus anymore, like they're just honest about that. They're like, hey, I'm kind of burnt on this. I need to step away for a while. Can we take a break?
Yeah, sure. I don't think we could have planned the mobile phone to ring any better than that. Although we didn't plan it, but
somebody just genuinely called me, and I had to quick silence my phone.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit in your introduction, and we've mentioned it a couple of times. You've got a new project called Request Metrics. Is this also a TrackJS product as well?
It is. We're not standing up a new company. We're not figuring out a new team. It is the same people who built TrackJS over the last 7 years. This year we decided that we wanted to start working on something new. So TrackJS, if you're not familiar with that, is a JavaScript error monitoring service. So we collect exceptions from front-end web apps, and we show these detailed error reports about what are the pages, the browsers, the users, and the errors in your system. How big a deal are they? When are the ones you need to pay attention to, and how do you debug them? That's kind of the real quick pitch about what TrackJS does. Sure. What TrackJS doesn't do is we don't capture performance information. So I don't necessarily know how slow your web page is or how slow an API call is. But it's something that a lot of people have asked for. And so we've thought about, how do we add this feature? How do we do this? And we couldn't really figure out a good way to just add this to TrackJS without significantly changing and bloating the product, which is something that I'm very concerned about. I think a lot of products over their lifespan just keep adding features and get too big and too unwieldy and too hard to use. And so we wanted to do this as something separate. So it'll work great like alongside TrackJS, but it's a different product. And the idea is, what if we created a really simple, really fast way for people to see how fast are the different pages in my website loading? How fast is my API from the perspective of the end user? And not dump so many like charts and graphs and like complicated reports at people that they can't understand it, because that's what a lot of performance management reporting tools are just tons and tons of like reports about everything under the sun. And then they charge you, thousands of dollars for the privilege of using it. Yeah. We're actually trying to go like, hey, for 80% of the websites out there, this is all you need. If you need really advanced web reporting or web performance monitoring, you probably don't want to use us, because we're going to give you a really dumbed down set of reports that just load super fast and are going to be super cheap to use, with the idea that everybody should be able to know how fast their web pages are. Like your side project, your small business, your outside of the main corporate entity, side thing that is going on. You should still have, some idea of how fast the page is loading and when they slow down and that sort of thing. But it shouldn't require a bunch of training for you to understand how to do that. And so at the beginning of the year, we started embarking on building this thing with a lot of the same ideas that we had while we were building TrackJs, but it's still a new platform. And so we're able to do things new and see what's changed in the last 5 years and try out some new things. And it's been exciting.
Sure. So we're talking about modern development. So what modern things are you doing that maybe people haven't heard of or would probably blow some people's socks off?
Well, one of probably the most radical thing that we're doing is that we're building it in the open. From the first day that we started development on it, we recorded our mob programming sessions. So we would all connect to like a Zoom meeting and we just record it, and like ourselves like working through the issue, because we'd seen a bunch of people like on Twitch and those sort of things, like live code for hours and hours, and people watching that, and that's super interesting. And some of those channels are really popular, but personally, I think it's kind of boring. Like there's a lot of development where like you get stuck in like your mental model of how to solve a problem is just wrong, and you get kind of stuck in this weird loop, and you're like searching Stack Overflow and you're exploring through APIs and you're trying to find a way out to like, how do you solve this particular problem? And that's not so fun to watch. It's not so fun to watch somebody just sit there and kind of struggle and work themselves in a circle. And so we decided that we were going to record ourselves, but we were going to edit all of those annoying bits out. So we started editing these videos and like trying to get them down to like, 15 to 20-ish minutes of like, here's how we created the new project. Here's how we got our deploy working. Here's how we set up our first server. Here's how we did this feature, those sort of things. That's still us. It's still us naturally working through the process. But anytime where we get into like a weird bit of like a side adventure that ends up going nowhere, we edited all that out so that the audience doesn't have to like come on that journey with us. And what we're hoping for is that people can actually see a little bit about how the sausage is made. They can see how real developers are applying the technologies in a real world situation that's not contrived like in a training tutorial or something like that. That we're actually building something real that you can go out, you can look at, and you can see it running. And you can see what were the choices we made. What did we choose to test and what did we choose to not test? What parts of our system did we like worry about a lot of edge conditions on, and which ones did we think were not important and just kind of let it go? You can see us make these decisions in real time, and see, which bits of code are how are we approaching the problems at hand.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. That for me, sitting and watching people write code on a Twitch stream can be quite boring. I know I did a little bit of it a couple of years ago, and I keep meaning to go back and do some more. But I remember sitting and watching a guy. He was writing a games engine in C, I think it was, or C++, but he wasn't communicating with the audience. He was just sat there coding. And you would see him write something, then delete it, then write something else. And then he would go off and he'd look on a web page, and then he'd come back and he'd write. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on because I don't know C, I don't know C++. But when I gave it a go, I'd got Skype set up. So you could, if you were watching, you could actually phone in on Skype and talk to me, ask me questions. about what I was doing. I was constantly talking to the audience about what I was doing, why I was doing it, and people obviously ask questions in the chat on Twitch as well. And it was a really good experience. But as you say about the little rabbit holes that you go down, is that I was using an ORM that I wrote. I know that people have cringed now. I started writing a wrapper for Dapper because I don't like letting developers write their own SQL when it becomes complicated, because they tend to abuse things like entity framework and entity link to SQL and link to entities and all that sort of stuff, and make .NET do stuff that the database is really good at. So my wrapper did very basic CRUD stuff with link statements, but if you want to do anything a little bit more adventurous, you put that in the database and dealt with that. And then once I got to the end of that actually working, I was like, oh, if I just add a connection string, this works. And I started using that in this Twitch stream. And every time I did a stream, I would find another bug in the ORM. And then I would spend the next 4 hours digging through the code, fixing that bug and going, well, that's it for tonight. I haven't got time to do anything more. We'll maybe get something else done.
We didn't do any of the stuff we planned. We fell into this other weird thing.
Yeah. So it's something I keep meaning to get back to. And if any of the listeners actually out there want me to do that sort of thing, they do reach out to me and tell me, and I'll try and sort it out, and we'll maybe do something. Because I did enjoy doing it. But actually building a product for live that you're going to sell, that's maybe a bridge too far for me. It's
there are definitely some confidence issues around that where I am concerned of like, oh shit, do I really want to tell people that this is how this thing works?
Yeah.
But this, like, you're never going to get past that stigma unless people start talking about how all systems work this way. Like, no system that is out in the real world and making money and creating value is written to this ivory tower ideal of what software should be. There's always these nasty bit of things that are the dirty bits of the software that actually make money. And we just got to acknowledge that they're real. They exist, that like, this is how software works. You try and contain it. You try and be like, all right, we're going to try and minimize the grossness in the application. But do you end up with some bit of your code that's kind of gross? Yeah, I think it's practically unavoidable. And I know that there's a whole bunch of people who probably, like, their buttholes just kind of clenched up a little bit. And they're like, I've made my system perfect. I abstracted everything properly and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but you spent way too much time doing it. Like, in the time you spent, like, refactoring your system to be that super clean bit of code that you're proud of, you could have just shipped and figured out if it was any good. And so sometimes I'm okay with, like, there being this nasty 300 line procedural method. Sometimes I'm just okay with it because the goal of, like, trying to abstract it out would end up being weirder than just reading the procedural method.
Yeah, I think that was one of the constant and biggest feedbacks that I got about the live programming, is that it made the viewers feel better about their programming, not because I was a worse developer than they were, although that was probably the case in a lot of it. But they would see me hit a problem and sit there and go, right, what's going on? I'd dig through it, maybe I'd fix it, or maybe I go, oh, I'm not sure, and I'd Google it, and I'd go, oh right, okay, that's what it was. Go through and fix it. And a lot of people would come back to me and go, do you know what? Seeing that you actually had problems in a similar way that I had them made me feel a lot better about the type of developer I am. And I thought that was great. You know, you're giving that something back, because as you said, that a lot of the stuff you see online is very ivory tower. And it's something I say about that people have this thought about podcasters as well, that it sets you a little bit higher up and they're in your ivory tower. They're these amazing developers. And it's like, no, we're exactly the same as everyone else out there. We make the same mistakes. You know,
we just talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. We're a little bit brave is probably not the right word. Stupid, and we admit our flaws. But one thing I was thinking about when we were talking then about it was that the live streaming of you programming could be, if you recorded it and then published it to YouTube for the listeners, a good way to try and circumnavigate doing coding interviews, because people could go on your YouTube channel and they could see how you code. They see if your practices are suitable. That's maybe a next generation in resume for anybody out there.
It could be.
Yeah. Just go. You want to know how I code, how I solve a problem? Go look at my YouTube channel.
It does put the onus back on the interviewer. Like, I already made this content. It's your job to go and watch it.
Yeah. So if anyone out there does go and do that, do let me know. And I might go and have a look.
Yeah, that'd be fun and novel.
Yeah. So if you're doing all of this in the public eye, is there any way that anybody can contribute, or is it still a closed project because it's just your company?
Right now, it's still a closed source project. We still wanted to keep the operations kind of our own, because in the wider industry, we've seen a lot of copycats. There's some other players in our industry that have open sourced their code, and really the major benefit or the major impact we've seen of that is that people just lift their code and make a clone of their service and with a different name and then run. And as long as they're doing it in like Russia or India or China or somewhere that's like not directly prosecutable from the United States, there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And so, although you will never completely avoid that, because, you know, even if they can't lift your code, they can kind of clone your feature, your product feature by feature. We just don't want to make it easier to do that. We feel like the videos are going to grant a lot of the transparency benefits that making it viewable source would, but it's not going to let somebody just willy-nilly just like navigate our code and clone it verbatim. They can see us build it. They can see the practices that we put in place. They can see the bits of code relating to different features, but it'd be very difficult for somebody to like lift it character for character that way.
It'd be a very, very long process to sit there and watch all the videos. Pause, right, type that bit out. Right, pause, type that bit out. It'd take them a long time.
It would take a very long time. And if they're willing to do that, well, I mean, fine, I guess.
Yeah. They've shown some staying power there at least.
But there's, I mean, the downside to what we're doing is that some people are like have already started criticizing us in that like that we've just made wrong choices in their opinion. So like we're only like our first like 12 episodes have released or so. And we have like another 30 in the backlog with probably some more bad decisions in them. But in our first couple, we talked about like setting up our initial environments, deploying our servers, getting our builds working, you know, the infrastructure stuff that kind of has to happen at the beginning of a project.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did was set up certificates, so we could have SSL on our boxes. And we kind of went down the path and fought with Let's Encrypt at the beginning of an episode. And it just felt like too many moving pieces to us. Like too many services that we would have to monitor, that the change rate of these agents that would have to fetch the certificates was just too fast. Like these things would just need to be upgraded all the time. We felt like we were signing up for a lot of maintenance work to get this working. So we ended up just buying, because you still can, a 2-year cert from a certificate store, like the old way of doing it. Yeah, and it cost us $100 to get a 2-year cert, and it's the last time we'll be able to buy a 2-year cert, because now they're making like the maximum time 1 year, and like that's fine. But essentially, our bet was, hey, in 2 years, this is going to be easier. Like this Acme protocol of like fetching your certs automatically from services like Let's Encrypt. This is all going to be like easy peasy, smoothed out in 2 years. So we're just going to pay $100 and kick this can down the road. And of course, like, we got criticized for that. Like, that Let's Encrypt is clearly more secure and more, better to do. And like, all of that's true. It's all absolutely true. Like, Let's Encrypt is more secure, but more secure isn't the only constraint on the table. And I like avoiding unplanned maintenance work. And right now, it just feels like signing up for a lot of unplanned maintenance work. And I will pay $100 to avoid 2 years of unplanned maintenance work.
Yeah, I think if we went back a few years, then the argument to use Let's Encrypt because it's free, I think would be valid. Because I remember sitting down and looking at the prices as a junior developer, looking at SSL certificates, and they were thousands and thousands of pounds or thousands of dollars for some of the basic SSL certificates. But it's just not the case anymore. So, you got to do what's best for you in your situation. And $200 to or $100 to a possible really good business, that's nothing at all, really, is it?
Right. It's compared, if we were to spend like 1 hour of our time like fighting with a maintenance problem of getting like our certificate request agent working, I mean, that pays for $100 to just never have to think about that. And so when that video came out, like, we got a little bit of hate on Twitter from people who like thought that, criticized us that we didn't know how to generate the certificate request correctly, or we didn't do it the way they would have done it. And that our rationale for why we didn't use Let's Encrypt was wrong. And like, they all have their own, points of view, and they're not entirely wrong. They're just not, we don't have the same set of priorities. Yeah. And so that, I guess, our priorities didn't get conveyed quite well enough in our videos for them to kind of understand our point of view. But like, that's what's the scariest part of all this, is just that we've signed up for this public criticism of people using our system, because there's way more weird things that we're going to get into as the video series progresses. Like, we're using Redis as our primary data store. Like, there is no database. It's just Redis. We're just using Redis, and Redis is persisting to disk, and we're backing it up, and there's no relationships between anything. And like, we're doing all of that sort of stuff in code. And we're doing that in order to get like a bunch of performance gains. Because what we really think is that a performance monitoring tool needs to be blazingly fast. Just as part of its own identity of like, I'm telling you your sites are slow. I need to never, ever be slow. And so in order to do that, we're using Redis to kind of accomplish some of that. And it's, on the face of it, it might not be the wisest decision for every aspect, but there's so many advantages from our context that I feel really good about it. But I think there's going to be some more criticism when those videos come up.
Yeah, but I think a little bit of criticism is good, because I think if you're not upsetting somebody somewhere, then you're probably not doing it right, because you've always got to have some hate somewhere.
That's fair. Maybe we just need to have like throwdown videos, and we're just like, this technology sucks, and like rapper beef videos.
Yeah. You could start calling out the people that are telling you you're wrong as well, and you could have back and forth rap videos then as well.
Oh, that would actually be super funny. That would be super fun.
So, is the request matrix at a point yet where it's usable? Can people go and start implementing it into their systems?
No, unfortunately, it is not. You cannot go out and sign up for request metrics just yet. Right now, we are in an internal beta, so we're running request metrics on the TrackJs properties to get like some real feedback on it. But it's still quite ugly in its UI. It's still like, it doesn't have the niceties that we would need to offer it for sale. We're very close though. We're probably only a few weeks out from offering. From doing a release on it. So if you're interested in using it and you want to play with it, If you go out to requestmetrics.com, we have a newsletter sign up that we don't really send any newsletters to yet. Probably should. But mainly it's for like when we have like a major release to invite people to. That's also where you can like subscribe to our YouTube channel and see what we're building. We're trying, like I said, we have tons and tons of videos in our backlog, and we're trying to release like 2 or 3 of them a week. But the videos are probably about 2 months behind where we actually are development wise. So, sure. Just the editing backlog just takes a while. Like we can record video a lot faster than we can edit video.
Oh, definitely. And I think through the magic of podcasting and time travel, I think maybe by the time this episode drops, that it may even be out. So we'll see. But what I will do is I will include all the links in the show notes. So anybody that's listening to this while they're driving, then you can just jump into the show notes afterwards and get that link. Don't worry about.
Sounds good. When this episode comes out, maybe we have released. Who knows? Yeah. We'll be in the future.
Yeah, so we'll just cover that then to make sure that we've covered all avenues. The release went really well then.
Oh yeah, everything went really great. Huge interest. We're making millions of dollars. Everything is great. Now let's do another take where an alien invasion has stopped our release.
To be honest, with everything that's going on, it's probably not that far-fetched.
It is not outside the realm of possibilities.
Yeah. So just to sort of cap everything off, because we're almost out of time, is if one of the listeners wanted to follow in your footsteps and start building some software in the public eye, whether it's to sell that software or just build it, what advice would you give them?
So there was a bunch of like little technical things that we had to fight through getting our recording setup working. Like I don't have a single big piece of advice to give you, but I can give you just here's a bunch of quick little tips. All right, you're gonna want a set of like headphones with a microphone on it, or if you're using like an external mic, you're definitely going to want to have a boom on it, because otherwise typing on your keyboard, even though it might sound very quiet to you, is going to sound like a thundering herd of antelope on the recording every time you touch your finger to the computer. Second, you're going to want an IDE that like you can change font size or zooming really easily, because people will not always be watching your stream full screen. They might have it in a little window. And if you have like your regular 12-point font and you can see like 100 lines on your computer at a time, nobody's going to know what the fuck you're doing. You need to zoom in and make it big. Like your code, like you're doing a presentation. Like big things, high contrast. If you're broadcasting it, you're not just doing it for you. Third, you need to vocalize what you're doing. Don't just sit there totally quiet, like thinking through your thing. Talk, like verbalize what you're doing. Having other people on your stream really helps, because then you're talking to them and you're working out problems. If you're going to go the live streaming approach, minimize like the wasted time and like side quests and that sort of thing by researching exactly what you're going to do beforehand, testing out the APIs, reading the docs, that sort of thing, so that you're not doing that while people are watching. If you don't want to commit to doing that ahead of time, then record and edit afterwards. If you're going to go down the editing approach, editing takes a ridiculous amount of time. If you have other things to do and have a little bit of money to throw at it, you can find people to do the editing for you. It usually costs like $30 or $40 an hour to pay somebody in another country to just do the editing for you, and it's often well worth the expense. We've done some of our stuff outsourced and some of it in-house, and like people who are good at editing are really good at editing. They are a lot better at editing than we are. I think that's all the tips I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, awesome. There are some very good tips in there, and some that I should follow myself if or when I get back into doing a bit of live streaming. Like, don't use my own ORM, because that's a stupid move.
Or at least don't fix bugs in your other project as part of the move.
Yeah. That's definitely definitely the way to go. It's so that just leaves me to say thank you for spending the time and coming on and talking to us about modern development for modern developers.
Thanks so much for having me, James. I loved it.
Yep, great stuff. And thank you, as normal, to everyone out there listening. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Todd Gardner talking about modern development for modern developers. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.